Good afternoon, adventurers. I want to talk a little today about poison. Cusco's poison, the poison made for Cusco, but also a bunch of other poisons as well. It's a damage type that is highly stigmatized within the game, D&D 5e, 2014 and 2024 alike, and I want to shine some light on why I don't think it's actually that deserved. It is the most resisted damage type, according to every monster book, and it has in the new monster manual 118 creatures that are immune to it, and 6 that are resistant, which puts it at number 1 on the immunities column by far, but they are also really predictable. That's one of the big points I want to make in this video. I'm also going to talk just a bit about character options for building with poison. If you want to make a character that uses poison damage, I think it is more viable than people give it credit for, and I want to talk about how. And last, I would also like to look at some character builds. I might not do a full build video style level by level guide or anything like that. We'll see how I'm feeling by the end of this recording, but I want to at least touch on some class and species combinations that can work for poison damage. Without further ado, let's get into some numbers. Like I said, there are 118 creatures in the new monster manual immune to poison, but we can largely break that down by creature type. There are 18 elementals that are immune to poison, understandable because they don't have flesh and blood. There are 13 constructs for the same reason that are immune. There are 33 fiends and 34 undead that are immune to poison, which again kind of makes sense in their lore. I'm not going to get super into that. The important part is that with those two creature types combined, fiends and undead, there are 67 of the 118 immune creatures, meaning 56% of the list comes from those two creature types. If we add constructs and elementals to that list, we end up with 98 out of 118, which is 83% of the list coming from just those 4 creature types. We can also toss in green dragons to the list because I feel like it's pretty widely known that dragons are immune to the type of thing they breathe. So, with all of those together, we have over 100. We have 102 out of the 118 stat blocks. 86%, if anyone's wondering, of the list, leaving only 16 outliers in the other creature types. That's your humanoids, your fae, your monstrosities, celestials, oozes, and aberrations, and probably more that I'm forgetting, the rest of the dragons. Only 16 other creatures. So, as long as we're not fighting one of those 4 creature types or green dragons, poison's actually perfectly reliable, and we know that hardly anything is going to resist it outside of those creature types. I've already heard people talking about these 6, so I'm just going to spoil them a little bit. If you don't want to know, skip ahead like 20 seconds. The Succubus, Incubus, which are kind of an interchangeable stat block now, which is very cool. Cambion, which is interestingly the only creature that's resistant to poison and immune to the condition. Badger and Giant Badger, as I know Dungeon Dudes and some other people have mentioned, and the Assassin stat block, which is the only humanoid. Although a DM could ostensibly give the species bonus of poison resistance to dwarf or green dragonborn NPCs. So keep that in mind, I guess, depending on your DM, but it's not a guarantee. But numbers in a vacuum are only so valuable, so let's talk about what they mean. They mean that as long as we're not fighting those 4 creature types, like I already said, or green dragons, it doesn't actually matter much that poison damage is the most resisted damage type, because it will do fine against almost every other creature in the game. There are over 500 stat blocks in the new monster manual, and outside of those creature types, like I was just saying, there are only 16 immune and 6 resistant. So 22 out of a little under 400. That's only about 5%. Also, for comparison, fire damage has 49 creatures that are resistant and 47 that are immune. But aside from fiends and the fire type elementals and certain colors of dragon, they are a lot less predictable than poison is. There's a big ol' scattering of what those creatures are. Who would guess, for example, that a gray ooze is resistant to fire? I wouldn't. And it is that predictability that convinces me that a poison character can work better than people give it credit for. We're going to need a backup damage type, of course, but that's a very normal thing in D&D. Something like a pyromancer or an ice mage needs to have a backup damage type for when they run into things that are resistant or immune anyway. It's not different for poison. Now, I started digging through the PHB 2024 to find the character options that deal poison damage and inflict the poison condition, and there aren't nearly as many as I thought there were. I don't know what inflated that idea in my brain, but only a handful of things even apply. To go over those real quick, the Rogue's Cunning Strikes feature can inflict the poison condition on a Constitution saving throw, of course, and Assassin Rogues get a feature that when a creature fails its saving throw against that Cunning Strike, they also take 2d6 poison damage, and that applies round after round while the poison condition persists. That doesn't come on until level 13, though, so not exactly the ideal option if we're trying to base a character around poison damage in general. I thought I remembered Circle of Spores druids from Tosh's Cauldron of Everything doing poison stuff, but it turns out that's all necrotic, so that's out. There aren't even that many spells that deal poison damage, and I'll circle back to that in a minute. But the Draconic Ancestry Sorcerer gets a bonus to damage with poison spells, and can transmute spells into poison damage from the sort of elemental damage types. So sorcerers work fantastically. But surprisingly, or at least I was surprised, the most consistent poison damage we can deal is with the Ascendant Dragon Monk. That allows the player to switch the damage type with their unarmed strikes to one of the elemental types or poison, basically the types that dragons can deal with their breath attacks, and that applies all the time. Whether we're attacking with the attack action, with martial arts as a bonus action, or with the flurry of blows bonus action, all of those can be poison. All poison, all the way down. And it even covers our backups because, one, we can choose a different damage type when we make those attacks, and even if we want to stay more in theme at level 6, we're able to change the damage out for force anyway, because that's a base monk feature. 0 creatures in the monster manual are resistant or immune to force damage, so that's a universal backup option. Look how they massacred my Helmed Horror boy. Going back to spells, I sure thought there were going to be more that dealt poison damage. It seems like a bigger genre in my mind, but there are only 8 in the whole player's handbook out of over 300 spells that deal poison damage, or can deal poison damage. And I have to say can because that number includes Prismatic Spray, which has a chance to deal poison damage, Prismatic Wall, which deals poison and 4 other damage types, and several spells that let us choose a damage type, namely Sorcerous Burst, Chromatic Orb, and Dragon's Breath. There is, of course, the Poison Spray cantrip. That is going to be the most reliable source of poison damage, being that we can cast it at will. Xanathar's Guide to Everything also adds Infestation, which only deals about half as much damage, so at this point it's kind of just strictly worse. It used to have a better range than Poison Spray, but not anymore. They're both 30 feet. And Infestation uses a Constitution saving throw, which is at higher levels going to usually be worse than an attack roll like Poison Spray uses. And Poison Spray can crit, so there's that. Xanathar's Guide to Everything also adds Chaos Bolt, which has a chance to be poison damage and is kind of just strictly worse than Chromatic Orb at this point, with the redesign of how that spell works. And it also added Illusory Dragon, which freaking rules. Unfortunately, it's not on the Sorcerer's spell list, and neither is Prismatic Wall, just for the record. And of course, there's the 2nd level Ray of Sickness spell and the 5th level Cloud Kill. That is the sort of higher end of the poison spell damage right there, and it's a very famous poison spell to boot. And it's worth mentioning, Stinking Cloud applies the poison condition but doesn't deal any damage, and Contagion actually applies the poison condition now, although it deals necrotic damage. Oh, of course, there are also poisons we can apply to our weapons as a bonus action, and then hit creatures with them, assuming our weapon deals piercing or slashing damage. There are only 2 of those poisons readily available to players, and they are as follows. The basic poison in the player's handbook, which costs a whopping 100 gold pieces, which is a lot for the early game where the amount of damage deals would be irrelevant because that amount of damage is only 1d4. That is not a lot. It also doesn't apply the poison condition. It is solely damage. The plus side is that there is no saving throw on this, which means two things. One, it automatically deals the damage when you hit a creature, and that's never a bad thing to avoid a saving throw there. And two, it does actually double if we get a crit. So that's nice. We can't choose not to use the poison if we don't get a crit though, so it's 100 gold pieces either way. Unless a DM is raining gold upon us, 100 gold pieces is going to be prohibitively expensive at any level where 1d4 extra damage is going to actually matter. By the time we're in tier 3 and 4 making the big bucks, that amount of damage is simply not going to be worth not only 100 gold pieces, but our bonus action as well. So it's neat, but it's going to get a pass from me, dog. The other one is the poison we can make with the Poisoner Feat. It is significantly cheaper, being only 50 gold pieces and 1 hour of work for 2 doses at the start, scaling up with our proficiency bonus. So at maximum, level 17 and higher, 50 gold pieces for 6 doses. That is way cheaper. That's only about 8.33, I think, gold pieces. This poison also does a significantly higher amount of damage, 2d8, though there is a constitution saving throw gating it, so no crit damage, and there's a chance for the enemy to take no damage. It is saved for no damage, not saved for half, unfortunately. And it only coats 1 piece of ammunition, unlike the basic poison, which can coat 3. 3d4 for 100 gold pieces is still not a lot. On the plus side, the DC for the saving throw scales up, given our dexterity bonus increasing and our proficiency bonus increasing, which no other poison does. And speaking of, there are other poisons in the DMG. These are, of course, going to be campaign dependent, whether they're available at all, whether they're available for purchase, though there is a rule in the DMG stating that players can extract poison from venomous creatures. Extract venom, I suppose, would be a more correct way of saying that, with a DC 20 survival check. You can only extract 1 dose, and if you fail by 5 or more, you're affected by the poison, so be careful. Depending how many poisonous creatures we fight, or venomous creatures, I keep saying that wrong, this could be more or less useful. I don't think it's going to be reliable, personally. Unless we're fighting a campaign against a bunch of snakes, which could happen. I played Tomb of Annihilation. Now that we've gone over different ways to get poison damage, or I should say to deal poison damage, let's look at building a character. Or 3 characters, because I guess if it's worth doing, it's worth overdoing. Here we go. To our benefit, we can get our first source of poison damage right off the bat at level 1, before even choosing a class. That's right, if we play a green Dragonborn, we get a breath weapon that deals poison damage. And that is a cone or a line AoE. We can hit multiple creatures with it. It deals 1d10 damage, which is not always the most damage. It's possible to roll a 1 or a 2 or something. 1d10 isn't always a lot of damage, but at low levels, having any AoE at all is a nice box to have checked. We also get poison resistance for our own defense. Plenty of creatures use poison against their enemies, so that's us. And I want to give a shout out to Abyssal Tieflings, that is Tieflings born of the Demons of the Abyss, because they get Poison Spray, the cantrip, although there are plenty of other ways to get cantrips, so that's not my first choice. I'd rather have the Dragonborn, where I can have both. So for all 3 of these build overviews, I don't want to say guide, because I'm not going to go level by level. That will take too long. But in a nutshell, one of them is going to be an Ancestral Dragon Monk, one is going to be a Sorcerer with a splash of Warlock, and one of them is going to be Bard and Warlock. And we'll get to all of those right here, right now. So, on to the first of our builds today. It's going to be the shortest one. It's very straightforward, and that is just being a Way of the Ancestor Dragon Monk. The fact that we can do poison damage at will makes this an obvious choice, and monks are in a pretty good spot in the 2024 Player's Handbook anyway, so this is going to be a fine character pretty much no matter how we slice it. But for what it's worth, let's go over some of the finer points. First and foremost, we're going to, of course, be a green Dragonborn for that poison breath weapon. Second, we're going to take the guide background. If your DM allows for customizing backgrounds or taking old backgrounds and choosing ability scores and origin feat and all that, then just basically go with what guide says, except we can change the origin feat because there are some that are going to fit a little better than Druid, Magic Initiate. If we do stick with Magic Initiate, Druid, we can pick up Poison Spray, which will give actually a pretty good ranged option for when we can't quite get to the enemy with our monk's speed, or perhaps they're flying or some such. You're probably going to be hearing the words Poison Spray a lot in this video, so be ready for that. But for this build, it's not really that important. So we can go with a different origin feat like Tavern Brawler or Tough, being able to reroll ones on all our unarmed strikes, of which we're going to be making a lot, will come up now and then, and it can add quite a bit of damage to an attack, if we're lucky. Speaking of, lucky's not a bad option. Alert, there are plenty of good origin feats. I don't need to lecture you about all those. We're going to want to end up with a 17 in dexterity, so go ahead and put your +2 from your background in there and take 15 with point buy. As always, if you're rolling for stats, that's a you problem. And we're going to want 16 wisdom for that AC and for our saving throws for our monk features. We're also going to want quite a bit of constitution, so 14 at a minimum, which leaves us with a comfortable 14 in dexterity, and we can put the remaining 2 points in point buy to intelligence or charisma as we see fit, or strength, but strength really isn't that useful on a monk, so really we can pick whichever one suits our character better. Now level 3, as I mentioned, we are getting the Way of the Ancestor Dragon subclass from Fizban's Treasury of Dragons. That's going to give us our poison melee attacks, that's going to give us our poison breath weapon, our other breath weapon. We now have 2 different ones, and we can actually, once we hit level 5 and get extra attack, use both of them on the same turn. They aren't mutually exclusive. They are separate features entirely. This also gives us supreme choice when it comes to choosing a damage type for our melee attack. If we find something that's poison immune, which will happen sometimes, we can choose bludgeoning or lightning, fire, acid, cold, and starting at level 6, force as well. Also at level 5, sorry I'm jumping around, but features are relevant to other features. Our unarmed strike poison damage goes up to a d8, and then again at level 11 it goes up to a d10. Now, it's also worth mentioning, our breath weapon is 2 rolls of our martial arts die, so it starts at 2d6, then it's 2d8, but at level 11 it also increases to 3 rolls, meaning starting at level 11 it does 3d10, which is perfectly in line with our Dragonborn breath weapon, which deals 1d10 per sort of cantrip scaling milestone, level 5, 11, and 17. Granted, the Dragonborn one will end up slightly ahead at 4d10 versus 3d12 for the monk one, but the difference is so negligible that they're pretty much still interchangeable for the rest of the character's career. But I am getting ahead of myself. I am apparently not that skilled at build videos. I haven't really done any, so bear with me. Backing up to level 4, we're going to go ahead and take the Grappler feat. This will allow us to grab our enemies, get advantage on our melee attacks against that creature, give them disadvantage on their attacks against everyone but us, and reduce their speed to 0. It also means if we're holding someone that is our size or smaller, we can move at full speed with them, which is just nice. We'll be experts at moving enemies around the battlefield and getting them in position to set up our allies for cool stuff, as well as setting up our own breath weapons. And keep in mind, we have 2 hands, so we can grapple 2 people. Being able to maneuver multiple creatures around the battlefield and line them up for breath weapons is going to make our AoE capabilities all the sweeter. And that's pretty much the build. From there, we're going to use our ability score increases to increase our dexterity for our attack damage, wisdom for AC, and our monk saving throw for both our monk breath weapon and, of course, stunning strike. And we're going to want to increase constitution as well, as that is 1, our HP, which is important, and 2, our Dragonborn breath weapon DC. It's a bit unfortunate that the DC for the 2 different breath weapons is probably going to be different at various levels because of the difference in our wisdom and constitution stats, but that's just the way the cookie crumbles with features from our species. Hopefully that was coherent. Before we go on to the next one, I have been inspired as I was putting this character together. I have a character from the 2014 rules that is a monk and giant barbarian cross. So I might build that out and make a video about that if y'all are interested. Let me know in the comments if y'all want to hear about that. Also, he's a plasmoid. He's a little slime boy, and that's just fun. Now, this second build is actually the very reason that I made this video in the first place. So I was thinking of how I could maximize the damage and overall effectiveness of the poison spray cantrip now that it's been buffed. Specifically, its range has been buffed. Also, it uses an attack roll now instead of a saving throw, which is arguably better. And what I've come up with is a Sorcerer Warlock mix, I know, real original. And there are a couple ways that we can go about getting those levels, and I've been tossing those ideas back and forth, but I think I'm going to go with the one that really leans into poison spray the hardest. Now, for me, I'm always a proponent of creating our own backgrounds, customizing backgrounds, or using old backgrounds and choosing our ability score increases, origin feat, etc. If you can't do that, I would recommend just pretty much anything that raises charisma and constitution, as those are going to be our main stats, and the origin feat doesn't really matter very much. Any origin feat is pretty much going to be a good fit, as long as it's not something specific to like martial weapons. Like Savage Attacker won't be a good fit, or Tavern Brawler, things like that, but the tough feat is always good, lucky is always good, alert is always good, so whatever origin feat you go with, it's going to work out fine. We don't really need Magic Initiate on this build, because we're going to have plenty of spells and cantrips anyway, and we're going to have Poison Spray, which is the one that I recommended for our Monk build a moment ago. Hermit can work just fine, and Healer is a good feat anyway, even though we aren't going to have healing spells, so maybe a little bit muted. Merchant is available and comes with Lucky. Charlatan works, and Skilled is never a bad idea. In any case, we want to start at level 1 as a Sorcerer. That'll give us spellcasting, of course, and give us innate sorcery, which is very cool. Unfortunately, it's not going to interact with our Poison Spray cantrip. We won't get the advantage from innate sorcery, because we're going to take it as a Warlock spell in a level. And we'll get to that. But for now, we can use it on our Sorcerer's Burst cantrip, which is what I recommend taking at level 1. We could take Poison Spray as a Sorcerer spell as well, just to have it at level 1, but Sorcerer's Burst is going to be a reliable backup when we can't be dealing poison damage anyway, and we're also going to want to take Chromatic Orb as our first level spell, one of them, so that we can deal poison damage and other damage types as needed with that as well. Now at level 2, we're already going to be taking a hard left into Warlock, because Warlock is what's going to give us our powerful Poison Spray cantrip. Obviously, we're going to be taking Poison Spray. It is on the Warlock list, so we don't need Pact of the Tome. As for our choice of invocation, it's not terribly important. It's pretty much just the Pact ones, Armor of Shadows, and Eldritch Mind. We aren't going to need Mage Armor in a couple levels anyway, because of Draconic Ancestry Sorcerer stuff. Having advantage on Constitution saving throws is pretty nice. We can take Warcaster later on if we want, so it might not be necessary, but if we don't, that could be a good choice. Now at level 2 of Warlock, that's where things start getting spicy, because we get 2 more invocations. A bunch of them have the prerequisite of being a level 2 Warlock, so those all open up for us. Most notably, Agonizing Blast, which can now apply to any Warlock cantrip at all, not just Eldritch Blast. So we get to add our Charisma bonus, currently +3, to our Poison Spray damage, and that's just awesome. We can also, if we want, take Eldritch Spear, which increases, at this level, the range of Poison Spray by 60 feet, which is twice what it normally does anyway, for a total of 90 feet. And or we could take Repelling Blast to knock creatures back 10 feet when we hit them with Poison Spray. And even if we don't take either of those, or we only take one of those, and even if we don't take all of those, there are plenty of good level 2 invocations to choose from. We also get Magical Cunning, which can give us 1 extra first level spell slot. And now, at level 4, we jump back into Sorcerer, and at level 2 of Sorcerer we get Font of Magic and Metamagic, giving us our sorcery points and allowing us to do things like transmute spells and quicken spells. Granted, quicken is a little expensive at this level, given that we only have 2 sorcerer points, but transmuting other spells into poison damage is going to be pretty good for our whole theme. And at Sorcerer level 3, Character level 5, we're going to get our subclass of Draconic Ancestry. That will give us some extra HP, which is always nice. And Draconic Resilience is also going to give us an armor class of 10 plus Dexterity and Charisma. We also will gain access to a bunch of spells that we'll always have prepared and always have access to, those being Alter Self, Chromatic Orb, Command, and Dragon's Breath. Dragon's Breath is already a spell that we wanted because it can deal poison damage anyway, so we just get that for free. Means we can pretty much take whatever we want for our spells at this level. Leveling up to Sorcerer 4, we get our first ability score increase, and we're going to take Spell Sniper. That gives our Poison Spray and other spells that use an attack roll a longer range, increasing the range by 60 feet. If we also took Eldritch Spear, the range of our Poison Spray is now 150 feet, which is going to be plenty for like 99% of encounters. And it also makes our ranged spell attacks ignore 1/2 and 3/4 cover, and not have disadvantage if creatures are within 5 feet of us, which means that Poison Spray will always be a good option no matter what the battlefield looks like. Keeping in mind we're still doing Charisma modifier extra damage, and our Charisma modifier also goes up by 1 at this level. Then we level up to Sorcerer 5, get our 3rd level spells, which of course is a little later than other characters do, and that's fine, that's just the cost of multiclassing. But at this level we finally get our Transmuted Fireballs if we want. We get Fear and Fly automatically from our subclass, both good spells. And we get Sorceress Restoration, which allows us to, at the end of a short rest, get half of our sorcery point maximum back, meaning we can do even more transmuting and other things. And leveling up one more time to Sorcerer 6, Warlock 8 gives us most of our build, given that we get Elemental Affinity, the subclass feature that lets us add our Charisma modifier to the damage of poison spells. And in the case of Poison Spray, we get to add our Charisma modifier to the damage again, meaning we're now dealing 2d12 plus 8. For comparison, an Eldritch Blast would be doing 2d10 plus 8, so we're a couple points ahead. We also gain resistance to poison damage, which will just be good if we fight enemies using that damage type, which are not terribly uncommon. There is one more way we can buff our Poison Spray cantrip, and that is to take one more level of Warlock and grab the Great Old One subclass. That'll allow us to change the damage type of Poison Spray, any Warlock spell, to Psychic, which means that when we run up against something immune or resistant to poison damage, we can switch it to Psychic. Extremely few creatures are resistant or immune to both. We also get a bunch of free spells from this subclass as well. Detect Thoughts, Dissonant Whispers, Phantasmal Force, and Tasha's Hideous Laughter. And at this point, I like to think of our character as branching out from just poison to neurotoxin. That's a fun word. That's not a war crime or anything. We also gained the Awakened Mind feature, allowing us to speak telepathically with people, which is just nice. And from this point, we can pretty much continue as we choose. I would probably just continue with Sorcerer from this point. Level up, get more sorcery points, get those higher level sorcerer spells like Cloud Kill, and keep transmuting stuff into poison. With only 3 levels of Warlock, we will eventually get up to the 9th level spells like Wish and Meteor Swarm. Changing Meteor Swarm to poison damage is probably not necessary, but could be interesting at least. We'll also eventually gain Dragon Wings, of course, although that feature got nerfed a little bit, unfortunately. And eventually we won't get Dragon Companion because we will have too many levels of Warlock, but that's okay. We will have much better stuff to do for pretty much the entire career of our character than worry about a level 18 feature. We could also keep taking Warlock levels. At level 6, we get a feature where if we use Awakened Mind to connect with an enemy, we can make them make a Wisdom saving throw, and if they fail, we have advantage on attacks against them, which would fill in the void a little bit of not being able to use innate sorcery on our Poison Spray, although it would come in a little later in the middle of Tier 3. And just because people like to compare cantrips to Eldritch Blast, I want to point out that in Tier 3, when we're dealing 3d12 plus double our Charisma modifier, a Warlock dealing 3d10 plus 3 times their Charisma modifier is only going to be about 2 points ahead of our Poison Spray build. And if we get a crit, because only the dice are doubled, Poison Spray actually comes out a point ahead. That is assuming, of course, we have 20 in our casting stat. The numbers will be ever so slightly different if that number is also different. If nothing else, I do recommend taking a 7th level of Sorcerer, because then we get Sorcery Incarnate, which allows us to use innate sorcery even if we're out of uses by spending 2 sorcery points, and allowing us to use 2 meta magics on a spell when it's active. So we could do things like transmute and empower a fireball, or quicken and transmute a fireball, or another spell. So that is the second build. The third one is going to be a little wackier. I want to mix together all of our sources of poison. I didn't really talk about anything but spellcasting in the last one because it was a sorcerer warlock. I want to get weapon-based poisons in there, and I want to get the breath weapon in there. So this one, we're going to start Green Dragonborn, of course. Similar thing with the backgrounds. I don't need to rehash all of that. And this time we can start right away as a warlock because none of our classes are going to have the ability to start with Constitution saving throw proficiency, which is usually what I aim for when I can. So it doesn't really matter which one we start as. And starting Warlock will give us our upgraded Poison Spray all the sooner. So similarly to the last build, we're going to start with 2 levels of Warlock and grab Poison Spray, grab Agonizing Blast, and if we want, grab Eldritch Spear and or Repelling Blast as well. As always, there are lots of really good invocations, so pick your favorites. And then we're going to start taking Bard levels. And multiclassing the Bard, we even get an extra skill proficiency. And then at level 2, we get Expertise in 2 skills of our choice. Now, if we're trying to be a Poisoner, I would recommend Stealth and Sleight of Hand, because that will give us a better chance to apply poisons in people's food or drink, or onto their skin even, perhaps, without being noticed. There are poisons that don't necessarily need to be applied via weapon. At level 3, we want to take College of Valor, which will give us not only proficiency with medium armor and shields, as well as martial weapons, but also Combat Inspiration, which is nice, not really that helpful to our build, but helpful to our companions. At Bard level 4, character level 6, we get our first ability score increase. Again, it's a little later than usual, but that's just multiclassing. We're going to take the Poisoner feat, and now we can poison a weapon. We're pretty good at using weapons now that we have Valor Bard. So now we can use a bonus action to poison our weapon and potentially deal 2d8 extra damage. At level 5, we get Font of Inspiration, which is just a phenomenal feature. Our Bardic Inspiration goes up to a d8 and comes back on a short rest instead of a long rest. At level 6, Valor Bard gives us extra attack, and it's a special extra attack that lets us cast a cantrip in place of one of the attacks. So we can cast our upgraded Poison Spray, and also poison our weapon with a bonus action and make an attack with it. Now we're using all parts of that animal, and if we choose, we can still replace one of our attacks with our Dragon's Breath. So if we want, we can use our Dragonborn Breath weapon and cast Poison Spray, and we could even poison our weapon with our bonus action to be used later. Or we could use our Dragonborn Breath weapon and poison our weapon and stab somebody. Whatever we want to do. And of course, there are other poisons in the DMG that might do more damage or have a different saving throw. If we want to get really crazy, we could even combine this build with the last one, take 6 levels of Sorcerer, and get that extra damage to all our poison spells. Although at that point, we might be relying on our cantrip a little too heavily. Although it would also give us the option to quicken another one. So we could, for example, use our Dragonborn Breath weapon, cast Poison Spray, and then quicken another Poison Spray. If we don't want to get that crazy, though, we can just keep taking Bard all the way up to level 18. Bard's a solid class. Always has been. If we want, we can also grab a 3rd level of Warlock, just like we did last build, to switch to psychic damage when needed. But that's really the core of this build, is to mix those poisoned weapon attacks with our Poison Spray cantrip with some extra damage, and possibly some extra push and range as well. So in conclusion, while there aren't a ton of ways for players to engage with poison damage in this edition, at least not without some involvement by the DM giving them access to different poisons, there are still some ways we can build a character around it, and as long as we're not against those certain creature types, I think it's actually going to work out fine. Most of the characters I've played and played with and DM'd for have tried to have multiple damage types available to them. Unless they specialize in force damage, then they don't really need to. So having poison damage as your primary, I don't think is really going to be that detrimental. Now, I haven't played these builds yet, so maybe I'm completely wrong. I'm gonna try and play them soon, and but I'm expecting it to go pretty much the same as a character based on fire or something, just maybe having to use their backup weaponry, backup spells a little bit more. In any case, this is a longer video, but I have had plenty of fun putting it together. So thank you all so much for watching. I appreciate all of you who like, subscribe, and comment down below. If you have experience playing a character that uses poison a lot, please tell me how that went, and I'll talk to you next time. Happy adventuring in 2025.